It's Wednesday, and you know what time it is. Welcome back to the Women's Lounge. I'm Emiliana Guereca, your host. If you are listening today, you know that we are on the brink of a government reopening. As we all know, 8 Democrats caved. I'm going to say caved to the Republican Party and the current administration. And here we are. We heard about that just a few days ago. So 40 days of a shutdown, and 8 Democrats have voted yes to reopen. And realistically, we got nothing, not even a raisin. We can say it was for nothing, but it isn't. We hope that there's more strategy than what we're seeing. So we're headed into a vote in Congress, which Democrats have vowed to vote no. Some have vowed to vote F no on that, but I'm not holding my breath. So we'll see where that takes us. Another doozy of a thing, some Congress members have released an email or a few emails from Epstein to Ghislaine, his girlfriend at the time, stating that the current president, President Trump, knew about the girls, knew that they were underage, knew what he was doing. So he goes on to call him a dog, goes on to say a few other things, and the name's been redacted, but there is a name in there. Although the name's redacted, he writes that this young woman spent hours with now President Trump at his house, spent hours at Epstein's house. So that's pretty incriminating. And again, it isn't hearsay. Someone said it. It is in an email from Epstein to his girlfriend. So stay tuned for that. And coming up on the Women's Rights Watch, we finally have Adelita Grivalia sworn in from Arizona 50 days after she was elected to Congress in Arizona. Adelita becomes a decisive 218th member to support the release of the Epstein files. So stay tuned. Let's see what happens. Coming up next is Sarah Bradshaw. Sarah Bradshaw is talking to us about education. She is a public education advocate. She talks to us about the fights that are happening in the classroom at school board meetings, but also why it is important to continue to fund public education, what's at stake, what do we need to do to continue to support public education, teachers, students in the classroom. Let's get into it. Welcome back. We are back at the Women's Lounge, and my guest today is Sarah Bradshaw, a public education advocate. And I would say, dear friend, Sarah, you've been here from day one since we've started what we call Women's March Foundation and now at the Women's Lounge. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
All right, so let's get into it. When we talk about public education, I don't think I've ever met someone as rabid about public education as you are. Talk to us about when we say education is political, what does it really mean?
Well, it would be nice if things were far simpler and teachers and board members and parents and students were allowed to go about their day and simply learn what it would take for them to be successful as they defined it. Unfortunately, there are a lot of other factors that go into it and a lot of other people who would like to define for the individuals what it is they need to be studying and so forth to be successful. And others who are defining successful, others who impact that through policy, through funding, through their personal agendas, their religious or community or cultural agendas. And so we talk about intersectionality, and public schools are the intersection for the vast majority of young people in this country. There's certainly a percentage that are in private schools and have at it, but for the vast majority of Americans, public schools are what pull us together. It's what unites us. It's the common ground. It's complaining about lunch. You can always go somewhere and speak with someone else about how bad the lunch was.
Right. Do you think that right now the classrooms are being used as a battleground? I'm going to say people will talk about the cultural battleground. Is it just the classroom? Is it all of the public education system?
It's all of the above. It's it's so darn hard for, say, a school board member to walk into the grocery store and get what they need and get out of there without someone confronting them about their opinion on one topic or another. And this can range from my kids should be on the football team to you need to eliminate sex education because my religion says so. And it's a challenging role. And I just thank everyone out there who is in public education because you are doing a tremendous service to this nation. Likely you're underpaid, you're underappreciated, you're working more than you should be, and you're paying out of your pocket for a lot of supplies that should be there and available to you as a resource to your students. So thank you for your work.
And volunteerism. Whoa.
Right.
With the volunteerism around it.
And if you would, I'm old enough to remember when schools were fully funded, and it was a position of respect, and it was something that everyone wanted for all youth. And it was a place of community. And back to the volunteering, you had lots of folks in there volunteering. You had community groups. Since Ronald Reagan declared ketchup a vegetable, we have been cannibalizing our youth, their resources, and we've been degrading the role of teachers and school districts and those who serve youth.
My kids went to public school all the way to fifth. I'm a public school kid, and I think when we talk about teacher burnout, right, I think that people don't understand some of these teachers are working second jobs. I saw a teacher bagging groceries, and I'm like, wait, we should be paying her enough. What are you hearing around a teacher burnout past COVID and where we are today?
So this is where it becomes a feminist issue. There's an assumption because vast majority of teachers, a lot of the teachers obviously are women. And so there's an expectation or a thought that this is a second issue for them and that they would stop teaching when they had kids. But a lot of our teachers have kids, and the people who have kids are women. And we've failed to adjust to that and support them in that role. So that's two jobs right there. So there is absolutely burnout across the country. We are in a teacher shortage crisis, particularly in math and special ed. But it comes with pay. It comes with too many students in a classroom. It comes with, expectations, parents' failure to support teachers. But it goes back to an overall anti-education, women, anti-children, frankly, attitude. At one point, coming out of the Depression and World War II, it was all baby boomers. That was the last time we built and expanded and invested in public education because children were such a valued commodity. And then suddenly there were a lot of children. And with that kind of dropped the focus on kids. But again, I was lucky to be in that window at that time when we had industrial arts, we had home ec, we had after school, the Spark program where you could study all this stuff. The teachers were thrilled to be there. They were supported. They had healthcare. They had pensions. And so it can be there. We're choosing as a nation to disinvest in our youth, and we are far more focused on ourselves as opposed to paying it forward to the next generation, who, by the way, are the ones who will pay for our Social Security, are the ones who will be buying our houses when we age out, and all the rest of that. So it's a cycle that we can break, and we must break.
Right. So I think when we talk about investing in education, I think we forget the honoring of teachers, naming the labor. This isn't easy.
Right.
I know my kids remember preschool teachers and still are like, hi, Mr. So-and-so, hi, Mrs. So-and-so, right? So once a teacher, I'm going to say always a teacher. So I do think that we have to acknowledge that it is a feminist issue because most teachers are women. The other piece around it is when you talk about cannibalizing charter schools.
Right.
That wasn't really around when I was growing up.
No, it wasn't. And to be frank about this, California is in a lot better situation than most states. We have a requirement that they be nonprofit, but most of the country have for-profit charters. You will have a CEO of a for-profit. that's making more money, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars and serving maybe 400 students. We've got these online classes where high risk or at risk youth are shoved into these online classes and they barely turn on their cameras and they are receiving money from the state. In fact, New Hampshire just did a school choice thing where they are sending money to homeschoolers and to folks who have their kids in private schools. And the budget is like $30 million more than what was allotted. They are bankrupting and stealing from the kids in public schools right now to subsidize these questionable homeschooling, whatever the heck's going on there, and to subsidize private schools. And, I was lucky enough to get a scholarship and to attend the oldest boarding school in America. But all that's good. But most of those families did not need state money to send their kids to a private school. And we are so much better off in California than, really, take a look at Florida and Ohio and New Hampshire. And it's, even though the vast majority of students in those states are, in fact, in public schools, they're siphoning off so much money to these unaccountable private actors who are unaudited and so forth.
And it's a higher paying charter. And so the research I've done looking at charter schools is that some of the communities get sold a bill of goods. A charter school will be this, that, and that. And I'm like, it's still public school, but you're siphoning money. But what one particular charter school teacher told me, said, well, but we don't have pensions. And so I didn't realize that they were going for higher pay, but realistically, they had no retirement money. So I think that's something that's not talked about around charter schools. I'm going to move into school boards and why I've attended a few school board meetings and why I didn't ever think school board meetings would be exciting, but this was a total battleground from, as you said, talking about sex ed, talking about sports, even figuring out that there is no Gulf of America.
Right. Yeah.
What is going on with the school boards?
Well, I often say this, they are treated like human piñatas. It is shocking, some of the behavior that adults seem to believe is acceptable. We've had board members assaulted. We've had board members, doxxed and all the rest of that. Bless the school board members out there. They're the bunch of people in the equation who receive, by and large, most districts receive a stipend if they're lucky enough to get that. They are saints and it's
do-gooders.
They're do-gooders. They tend to be Boy and Girl Scouts, but these are critical roles and it is so important. There's an organization called Moms for Liberty that have set out to take over school boards and they are particularly problematic and a concern for those who are vested in students learning kind of the facts of life as they are.
It's a really conservative group. So
yeah. But there are others out there. And school boards really, it's where a lot of the big decisions are made. Who hires and fires the superintendent and a number of other issues. So they're a critical piece. I would encourage everyone to attend your board meetings respectfully. Consider running for school board. It's a great place for women to get started. Kathleen Brown here in California, there's a long list of women who ran for higher elected office, who started out with their local school boards. It's a great way to learn about governance and budgeting and personnel and the complexities of governing and state federal laws and so forth.
And looking at how policy affects the budgets. I do think the goal is, for me at least, to make sure that we have women running for those seats, right? So I do think most people think, oh, it's a difficult seat. No, run for it. You may decide you love it and then run for a different seat.
Yeah. And in fact, just learning how to run is critical. And you start out simple. You start with who you meet up with at PTA. Who do you, go to the park with your kids, and you start networking and build from there. People fail to understand that in the bigger context, this is all a war on education, science, and ultimately, in many ways, against women, eliminating Pell Grants, going after the universities. Women now are attending universities at a much higher rate. That's causing many people to start saying, well, we need to get rid of education because women are more educated, which, by the way, I believe is partly why the birth rate has dropped. We are in the middle of a large drop in demographics. In California, we use the average daily attendance to fund our schools. And so there is a demographic decline. The entire United States is becoming older and people are having fewer children. I happen to think that's a good thing. The planet really cannot sustain as many Americans. We consume a lot. And so there are these larger contexts, but the rubber's hitting the road at our public schools and people are feeling the pinch all the time.
Right. And I'm going to say, when we talk about funding public education, I had someone say, well, you're against homeschooling. And I'm going to say it's a feminist issue because most homeschoolers are women. And so when we are tasking women with also being a teacher, I mean, my kid sees 5, 6, 7 teachers a day. There's no way I could fulfill that. And then make dinner. And then rinse and repeat. So I do think that defunding education is definitely a feminist issue in so many ways. And so talking about, looking at the future, what gives you hope about public education that does not include homeschooling? Because I'll say, personal opinion, not a fan of it.
Yeah, no, not a fan of homeschooling, not a fan of privatizing, not a fan of siphoning off public dollars to be given to private charter chains that fail children. So all of that aside, what gives me hope? The kids. They're pretty resilient. They're pretty smart, and they've got access to a lot of information that none of us had prior. But we have got to reevaluate how we look at children. There's a saying that in your budget, your policy is in your budget. And if you care about kids, it would be in that big, bad, ugly BS. All we've done is try to get rid of the Department of Education. We're pulling up the ladder every chance we can. And of course, the baby boomers didn't help. They're kind of big fans of themselves and have stripped away a lot of the money that went to children, to them, has gone up to the senior citizens. And now they're even going after the senior citizens. But when you give up on the least among us and the youngest and those who have no ability to vote people out and no ability to advocate for funding, it really reflects poorly on our collective
society.
Yeah.
On our society. So I'm going to say that I did hear kids said that when they grow up, they want to be a teacher. And I hadn't heard that in a really long time. So I do think that kids are paying attention around policy, around education. These kids spend more time with their teachers often than they do with their parents, right? And so I do think that investing in our kids, public education, I'm going to say the classroom, is where we're creating the future. So in closing, what gives us hope is the kids. What would you say to that auntie, mom, anybody that wants to volunteer in the classroom?
Thank you. Actually, it starts with a thank you. Go into it not expecting, a gold star every day. Principals are overwhelmed. Teachers are overwhelmed. They can't always use what you're offering. It's a challenge. My daughter wants to be a teacher.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. Scares me a little. In any case, so there was a teacher. Every year she does a question of students. What is your hope? And she said 60% of these kids came back and said was to win the lottery. That is not a plan. And so we've got to make it possible for those who want to go into teaching to be able to finish their credentials without an enormous college cost. That's one of the big things that's holding folks back. But it's scary. In Arizona, they've had to resort to not requiring a college degree. I believe it's Arizona, because they're so desperate to get
teachers,
people in the classroom. Yeah.
So, all right. I think we're going to close it off with thanking you. And where can we find more information? Do you want to give us a website? Anything like that?
Sure. I follow the teachers. Randy Weingarten from AFT is actually going to be in town this week. She's a tremendous leader. Look to the unions. They're not always spot on. And of course, their job is to serve their members. But check in with your PTA, check in with your superintendent, check in with your school board members, and come from a place of love, because they've been under attack for so long. We've got to do more to close the achievement gaps. There are a lot of gaps out there. So let's start with the least among us and see what we can do. You know, it's that saying, tide lifts all boats, but not everyone owns a boat. So just start from there. Come from a place of love and support, and you will be most useful.
Thank you. So coming up next, Women's Rights Watch. Thank you, Sarah Bradshaw, for speaking to us on public education. Stay tuned.
Sarah has completely talked about what is at stake for public education, asking us to continue to support, but more important, to pay attention, to look around, to see what's happening. What's happening in Washington is not just isolated. It affects our kids, it affects our communities, and there's a reason that education is on the chopping block. There's a reason that they target the institutions like Harvard, like Columbia. So realistically, the less we know, the better it is to lie to us. So don't fall for it. Continue advocating for public education. We cannot afford to stay quiet. We cannot afford to regress and sit everything out, because our kids' future are at stake. Our kids deserve better. Our teachers deserve better. And our democracy depends on an educated society. Our democracy depends on it. So thank you for listening. I'm Emiliana Guereca, your host at the Women's Lounge. So if you like this episode, share this episode, subscribe, and like always, stay loud. Thank you for tuning in to the Women's Lounge.